Chapter 2. Olhart. Alan Olhart was catching fish in the river near his home. He had short blonde hair and wore rags and fishing pants. He waded in the water up to his hips, standing as still as he could. He wiggled one finger in the water, patiently waiting for a fish to swim by.
"You might actually catch one this time,"
taunted his older brother Adam from the riverbank.
"Shh."
His father Aethor whispered next to him. A fish approached. Alan stood still and eager, wiggling his finger in the water. The fish grew closer until finally it lunged. Alan held his finger into the fish's mouth and pulled it from the water. The fish thrashed about wildly as Alan bear-hugged it. It was half the size of the boy of 15 years. He struggled to keep hold of it as he stumbled on the smooth river stones and running water at his feet. He almost lost it as the slippery fish flicked out of his grasp. He tore it upside down, holding it tightly. The fish slapped him in the face with a powerful wet tail, and Alan fell into the water, losing the fish. Alan could hear bellows of hearty laughter from the shore from under the water, and his face went red. He didn't want to resurface.
Maybe I can just die in the river,
he thought to himself, embarrassed. He didn't resurface until he started to lose his breath. Alan surfaced and stumbled to the riverbank. His father, Aethor, helped him out of the water.
That one was big for a first-timer. Alan's first one was no bigger than a garret.
At least I didn't lose mine.
"Boys!"
The soft voice of their mother Asta called from their house near the river.
"Dinner will be ready soon."
Aethor carried a stick with a dozen fish tied to it back to the house. He was a thin man with a defined muscular build. He had light brown hair and trained often, working through martial forms. He had a tree near the house with poles sticking out of it that he used as a sparring partner. Working through katas, he frequently did strength training. His family often watched with admiration, and his boys Adam and Alan sometimes joined him. Adam more often than Alan, as he was 5 years older and much more capable. Alan spent more of his time with his mother, tending to household chores and helping in the garden, playing with the various strange creatures he found there, while Adam hunted, fished, and trained with his father. Their house is small and modest and was located at the edge of the water in a place called Riverside. Just beyond was the living forest, a dense forest created during the Cataclysm full of fast-growing vegetation said to be cursed with dark magic. Further downstream was the city of Dawnshire, a city controlled by the Church of the God-Feared, a religious sect who worshipped Guldenir the God-Feared, the all-powerful ruler of Thalaria. Aethor stored the fish in a barrel of salt outside the house, ready for transport to Dawnshire the next day, while the boys went inside. Asta ruffled Alan's hair as he walked in the door, and he smiled at her lovingly. She was a homely woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. Her most defining feature was her kind heart, always there with welcoming hugs and words of encouragement. Their house was small, just one large room with some beds at one end, a cooking pot and a fireplace elevated at the other end. The roof was made of large leaves from the trees around the living forest. Straw and timber for the most part. They kept out the rain and blended in with the environment, which kept them safe from the might-night creatures that roamed the blasted lands beyond. The fireplace was made of river stones and clay. The floor was made of stone and timber. Aethor had built the house here in Riverside to get away from Dawnshire and the religious insurgents that lived there. Aethor hated the Church of the God-Feared and often attended political meetings opposing them. He was chastised his whole life for being a descendant of Aram Olhart, who assisted Lawcaster Pendragon in instigating the calamity known only as the Cataclysm, and so chose to live outside of the safety of the fortified cities, relying on his own strength. They sat around the fireplace as the sun disappeared, and as they ate a hearty meal of fish and vegetables, Aethor told them stories of heroes of old, including that of Lawcaster Pendragon, Aram Olhart, and of the Cataclysm. Alan was seated in front of the fireplace. Sleepily he asked Aethor,
"How long ago was the Cataclysm?"
It happened well before I was born.
Aethor replied with a look of contemplation on his face.
I think about 500 years or so. The Cataclysm refaced the land, and much was lost. You know, They say that our ancestor, Aramble Hart, assisted Lorecaster Pendragon in causing the calamity. They say they messed with powers they couldn't comprehend. If you believe that words of the church are the god feared.
Aethor grunted, looking into the fire. Aelin could see the resentment on his face.
Father, can I come with you to Dawnshire tomorrow?
Absolutely not. I wouldn't go there at all if I didn't need to sell our produce and buy supplies.
Aelin looked disappointed, then replied.
But Adam always gets to go with you.
Aethor gave him a disapproving look and smiled at Asta.
I need someone with a strong back to help me move the wares into Wynn's shop. And I need you to stay here and protect your mother while I'm gone.
Asta smiled back at him.
I'll be fine, Aethel. It'll do him good to see the city and see how things work around here.
She said. Aethor sighed deeply.
Fine. You can come.
Helen's smile grew wide with excitement. Aethor looked him in the eye sternly and said,
We are protected for the most part here at the edge of the living forest. But beyond the lands are full of horrors. The blasted lands between here and Dawnshire are dangerous. So stay in the boat until we get to the city.
Sure thing, Dad.
Aelin said, grinning.
We leave at first light.
Hathor stood.
Count Adam. We need to light the torches for the night.
He said as Adam stood to join him outside. Hastus tucked Aelin into bed. Aelin looked at his mother.
Mum, why do we keep the torches lit at night?
She walked to the window to watch them.
Because outside of the safe havens of the forest, there are creatures that prey in the dark. I am thankful they are rarely seen here, so close to the forest. But just in case, we light the torches. Even the light retreats in fear of them, so we can tell if they are nearby.
She explained. Helen shivered at the thought of something so evil.
Try not to dwell on it, little one. You have a big day tomorrow. Get some rest.
Love you, Mother.
He said as he fell asleep. That night, Aethel woke. Asta was asleep next to him in his bed. He brushed the hair from her face and smiled. He got out of bed and slipped on his boots. He felt something squishy splash between his toes.
Oh, blasted shoe slugs.
He muttered sleepily. The shoe slugs like to eat the dirt and dead skin from your clothes in the early mornings. While they typically retreated before the sun got too warm, sometimes they'll still be in there in the early hours. Friendly, even cute creatures. They are often used to clean clothing, but not when you accidentally tread on them. Aethel walked outside and shook the slug juice from between his toes, scooping it out of his boot. His hand was covered in slimy green goo. He washed his boot and foot with a nearby hand-cranked water pump, then placed his boot on his foot and grabbed a torch on the sconce near him. He turned to use the outhouse in the vegetable garden. The night was quiet and dark. He placed the torch on the wall sconce next to him, then let out a sigh as he relieved himself. When he was done, the light in the outhouse dimmed. Aethel looked at it alarmed, and he grabbed the torch. Slowly opening the door, he peered through the crack out into the garden, then crouched down and moved low through the foliage. Hidden by tall plants, he made his way back to the house, which was now much darker than before. He placed his torch back on the wall sconce and left his boots outside, then slowly closed the door, placing a beam in front of it to secure it shut. He made himself ready. Moments passed in utter silence, until he heard trotting and panting running down the road close to the house. He looked outside through a window. Several large dog-like creatures with large sharp teeth and protruding jaws sprinted by quickly as if running down their prey. Aethor ducked against the wall as they passed until the sound of running pools stopped. The light slowly returned to normal as the creatures faded off into the distance. Aethor gave a sigh of relief and kept watch for several more minutes before returning to his bed. Hours later, Helen and Adam were working by Aethel.
Wake up, sleepyheads. It's time to pack the boat.
Helen sat up groggily and rubbed his eyes while Adam pulled the blanket over his head. Asta started preparing food for the boys to take with them. Aethor saw Adam not rising, so he went outside until he found a bunch of tickle worms clustered together in a nearby tree. He covered his hand with a cloth, then grabbed a few, making his way back into the house. Aston knows what he was doing and struggled to hold back a cheeky grin as Aethor lifted the bottom of Adam's blanket and threw the worms under. Adam began writhing and thrashing with laughter under the blanket as the worms wriggled all over him, tickling him mercilessly. They all burst into laughter as Adam's blanket was kicked off and he stumbled around trying to throw the worms off of him. Adam rushed outside, removing his shirt, then dunked a bucket of water over his head to wash them off. His hair now stuck down against his face. The rest of the family, still roaring with laughter, joined him outside. He moved his hair, showing his father a very unamused pout of disdain. Aelin, Aethor, and Asta laughed even harder as Adam grumbled sleepily. They went down to the river to a small rowboat with cartwheels strapped to the sides. The rowboat could be converted into a cart for transporting goods by inserting the oars into the bottom, like an axle, an invention of Ahur's. They walked along a short wharf, throwing bags of vegetables folded into large tree bark and tied with string, and 2 small barrels of salted fish with straps on them like a backpack into the boat.
Farewell, Aston. We'll be back in a day or so.
Yeah, sure. Tell Wim I said hi. Oh, and Aethor, try not to drink too much.
Asta said, waving them off.
It takes only a few hours downstream by boat, and it's safer. It takes almost a full day to ride back by the road. We'll hire a carebook to help us get home once we're in Dawnshire.
Aethor said, grabbing a long oar. Adam grabbed one too, and Aelin sat in the middle. They made their way downstream. The waters were calm, clear, and level at first, but soon gained pace as they headed downhill.
Keep it straight, Adam.
Aethor said as the boat started rotating too much to the right. They stuck the large oars into the water, moving expertly down the rapids, pushing the oars against the rocks to avoid any collisions. A few hours later, the river calmed, became darker as it widened into a large lake.
Dawnshires on the far west side. We are far from the protection of the living forest now. Always be on your guard, even during the daytime.
An ashy dark fog permeated the lands outside of the 5 habitable regions of Thalaria, often referred to as the Blasted Lands. Aelin looked out at the water. A large serpentine-finned tail moved through the water behind them.
Dad, there's something behind us.
Aethor raised his oar, and as the creature moved in closer, he splashed the water with it, and it swam away quickly.
Dullfish are skittish alone, but frenzy in groups. They are horrifying to look at, like an eel with a human skull.
Aelin turned to look forward as the large gate and walls of Blonshire's port came into view. Standing 10 men tall and made of stone, the walls surrounding Dawnshire were covered in sconces.
Watch your words carefully in Dawnshire, boys. These people are quite protective of Lord Guldamir, and don't ever mention the Cataclysm here. Best not to stir up the church folk.
The voice of a guard called from atop the water gate.
What business do you have in Dawnshire?
The guard called down. Aethor called back.
We have wares, fish and produce for Wind's shop.
A few moments passed and the gates began to open up and they weighed the boat inside the port. It was small and circular, 5 wooden walls with stairs leading up the stone walls. Most of the shops were made of wood and stone. Wooden signs hung out the front of them indicating what was for sale inside. Immediately in front of them was Wind's shop. On the other side of the street was a tavern called the Slippery Squid. Aethor, Aelin, and Adam pulled the small boat onto the boat ramp at one side of the wharf, taking the cartwheels off the sides and sliding them into position on the bottom of the boat. With the oars acting as axle points, the boat now resembled a cart. They wheeled it around to Wind's shop. Aethor and Adam strapped the barrels to their backs, and Aelin grabbed the bundles of tied vegetables. As they pushed the ornate wooden door to enter the shop, the bell on the door jingled. Aethor placed the barrels on the floor.
Hey, behold!
Yelled a large burly man in an apron behind the counter as he slammed down a cleaver into a fish and moved to greet them. He picked up Aethor and bear hugged him against his large belly and fishy apron.
You look as good as you smell, Win.
Aethor struggled to say against the force of the man's hug. He placed Aethor down.
It's good to see you, Aethor. And you've gotten so big, Adam.
Wynne said as he patted Adam's hair with fishy hands. Adam sneered and was very unimpressed with this as he picked fish guts from his hair. On one wall of the shop were the taxidermized gullfish. It had a large human-like head, protruding jaw, and rows of large razor-like teeth with the body of an eel. Under it was an assorted display of prepared seafoods. On the other wall were displays of fresh fruits, vegetables, and barrels of spices.
What have you brought me today, Aethor?
Bellowed Wynne.
Vegetables and salted fish.
Aelin interrupted. Wynne leaned over to get a better look at Aelin.
You must be Aelin. Nice to finally meet you.
Wynne said, his voice booming without effort. His head was twice the size of Aelin's, and Aelin shied back, afraid of having fish guts smeared in his hair.
Yes, sir?
Aelin said, nervously. Wynne straightened up and turned to Aethor.
He looks so much like Asta. How is the woman?
As vibrant as the day I met her.
She's made you soft, Aethor. When I'm done with this shop, we should catch up at the tavern over yonder. I bet I can still drink you under the table.
Wynne said with a wry smile.
You're on, Win.
Aethor said, taking up the challenge with a wide grin.
Boys, take the cart round back off the street. I'm gonna help Wim with the goods.
Aethor offered. Adam and Aelin went outside and began to move the cart to the back of the shop. Behind the shop was a small stable full of straw. Inside it was a large two-legged winged creature with long feathers and a long neck. It squawked as the two boys passed it and put the cart down to rest. Strolling past the back alley, they overheard the voices of some figures dressed in the religious robes of the Church of the God-feared. One man was shockingly huge and towered over the other.
Aethor Ohad has been seen entering the city.
One voice said. Aidan and Aelin crouched behind a barrel to listen closer.
Truly,
said the large man.
So, the troublemaker has returned.
It's an insult that an Olhart still exists in this age.
Well then, we'll have to set up a little welcoming party for our guest then. Shall we?
The two men laughed as they walked out toward the street.
What do they want with our dad?
I don't know. We'd best be getting back.
Wynne and Aethor walked out of the shop.
We'll stay in the inn tonight, then head off in the morning.
Nonsense, Aethor. You can stay with me at the shop tonight, and I'll lend you my care book Dimitri for the trip home. He's vast, and can make his way back to me on his own.
Thanks, Win. I owe you one.
Aelin and Adam ran up to their father.
Dad. We heard two men talking in the back alley.
They were talking about you.
And always the popular one, aren't you, Aethor?
Wynne bellowed sarcastically.
I'm sure it's nothing, boys. We won't be staying long. Rest up here tonight, and we'll head out first thing in the morning.
Aethor reassured them.
Come along now,
he said, looking around as they crossed the street and entered the Slippery Squid Tavern. They found a table and ordered food and ale. Later that evening, Aethor put his face down on the table with a thud. Wynne laughed heartedly into his cups.
Just chill a lightweight, Lord.
He bellowed. Aelin and Adam had already gone to bed above Wynne's shop. A drunk at a nearby table turned to face them brutally, sneered, then left his coin on the table as he got up to leave in a hurry. Aethor grunted and conceded defeat. Wynne bellowed a victorious cry, followed up by a massive throaty burp.
I win again. Let's order you some water. Can't have you driving the cart back drunk now, can't we?
Wynne said, patting Aethor on the back. A while later, Aethor raised his head.
Time to call it a night, old friend,
he said grobbily. But as they stood up to leave, the patron that hurried out earlier barged in with a dozen other men in the robes of the God-feared. One huge muscular man in a black leather vest with legs the size of tree trunks ducked through the doorway. He could barely fit through and stood towering above them. Some patrons got up and left in a hurry. Others stayed to watch the show.
That's him there! The big one called him All Heart,
said the drunk patron as the huge man put some coins in his palm. He then scampered out of the tavern away into the night.
All Heart, eh?
He called to Aethel.
No doubt a treacherous dog just like that Aram and the rest of his ilk.
The large man taunted. Hathor sighed, placed some coins on the table, and got up to leave. As he tried to walk by, the big man placed a large hand on his chest.
Why don't you stay a while? You look thirsty,
he said with a devilish grin. Aethor looked up at him angrily as Win walked towards them. He squared up to the man, looking up at him. Win was a big man, but this man was gigantic.
Well, well, it seems the shopkeep wants to pick a fight with the town guard. You sure you want to do that, Windell?
Win stared at him.
Leave him alone, Harem Halfborn,
Win warned. One of the other men in robes grabbed a drink on a table nearby and threw it at Aethor. He moved his head 1 inch and it missed. It showered another table of 4 patrons in ale. Angrily, they got up, wiping the ale from their faces as the men moved into the room around Win and Aethor. A mug came flying into the face of the drink thrower from an angry patron nearby, shattering and knocking him out cold as all hell broke loose. Aethor took a step back and used his sidekick technique, stepping his back foot behind his front foot, then launching a powerful kick at one of the road men. It hit him square in the middle, knocking him off his feet. The man folded and hit the floor unconscious. The 4 men from the table rushed 4 of the road men, throwing punches left and right. Harem Halfborn threw 2 punches into Win's bloated stomach, then a heavy uppercut to his jaw. Win stumbled back, and a road man screamed as Win fell on top of him and smashed into a table. He squashed the man underneath him. The man groaned, but didn't move. 2 robed men either side of Aethor came forward. One man swung a chair at him, and Aethor threw a straight punch through the chair, shattering it and knocking the man out cold. The second man tried to punch Aethor, but he easily avoided it once, then a second time, moving his head inches in either direction. As the third punch closed in, Aethor intersected it with a back fist under the arm and into the man's face. With a crack, his opponent hit the floor. Win got up as Harem grabbed a patron assaulting one of his men and raised him above his head. The patron screamed at being lifted 10 feet in the air as Harem threw the man into Win, and they both fell backward through the bar counter, glass and liquor smashing everywhere. Win got up with 2 large bottles of hard liquor in either hand as Harem came for him. He smashed them together from either direction at Harem's head, but Harem had his guard up. The bottles smashed into his arms, glass and liquor smashed all over him. Some of the liquor got into his eyes. It burned and he grunted, squinting and trying to see Win. Win raised a big hairy fist and landed a mighty punch to Harem's face, sending him backward. The remaining 3 rogue men approached Aethor. One of them pulled a knife from his robe. Aethor saw the danger and turned to run. He sprinted up the stairs and they followed him in pursuit. He ducked into a room which joined directly with the room next to it and ran straight out the second door. 2 men followed him into the room and 1 stayed outside. A working girl screamed as Aethor dashed through the room and out the door. The door opened and he rushed at the rogue man in his path, delivering a jumping sidekick, sending him backflipping over the rail. He fell into a carriage wheel chandelier. The rope snapped and the chandelier almost squashed Harem as it fell. Harem saw it coming and moved out of the way. Win took advantage of the distraction and tried to tackle Harem around the waist. But to his surprise, Harem didn't move. Win was a big guy, but Harem was a monster. Harem put his hands together and hammered down on Win's back. Win groaned out in pain, but held on until another 2 strikes made him fall to a knee. Still holding on, Harem hit him again and again, and eventually Win lost his drink, barfing over the floor, falling unconscious. The 2 rogue men pursuing Aethor came out of the room, then pointed toward him. Aethor took his stance, and they were taken aback by his readiness to receive them. As the first one came forward, Aethor did a 180-degree turn onto his knee. his other foot spinning in a powerful sweep, taking his opponent's legs out from under him. He turned with the momentum and crossed one hand over his body to his opposing foot and flipped upside down. His back foot went straight up in the air, and with one hand planted on the ground, he used the momentum to bring his foot plummeting down onto his prone opponent to finish him off. Then Frog leaped to his feet. His last opponent, holding the knife, slashed at him. Aethor blocked the blade with his outer arm to stop it from hitting any vital parts, grunting as the knife cut his flesh. He leaped backward, grabbing at the wound on his arm. He glared at the man, anger in his eyes. The blood dripped down his arm to his hand, and he brought his hand to his mouth and licked the blood. His eyes changed to red as his opponent slashed at his throat. He backflipped and kicked his opponent's knife hand up with one foot and connected with his jaw with his other foot, sending him into the air. The man landed on his back, the knife clanged to the floor. Aethor ripped off his shirt and made a makeshift tourniquet, tying it around his wounded arm. His eyes returned their normal brown. Blood dripped to the floor from the wound. No sooner did he finish this, Haram Halfborn came crashing through the door behind him, knocking him through the rail and through a table one floor below. An oil lamp crashed to the floor, setting the tavern on fire. Aethor got to his feet, dazed and confused, as Haram jumped down from the second-floor balcony. Haram linked his fingers together over his head and charged forward with an overhead hammer fist attack. Aethor moved out to the side and attempted his spinning swing to Haram's leg, which connected but failed to move the man's giant leg, which made him smile menacingly at Aethor's weakness. Realizing his mistake, Aethor did a backward handspring, avoiding Haram's meaty fist, immediately following it up with his dragon kick. It hit Haram directly in his midsection, knocking the wind out of him. But Haram grabbed his foot, pulling him forward, violently grabbing him by the throat and lifting him up. Aethor struggled, choking as the tavern burned around them. Haram grunted and headbutted Aethor, leaving a bloody gash on his head. The blood ran down his face, and Aethor licked at it. He smiled as he looked into Haram's eyes, his eyes going red. Haram looked at him confused as Aethor placed his fingers at Haram's chest. Haram looked down as Aethor used his short-range punch technique, slanting Haram's heart. His chest indented with the force of the blow, and Haram stumbled back, dropping Aethor and holding his chest. Haram dropped to one knee, gasping for air, as Aethor grabbed his neck from the pain. They looked at each other, nodding, and laughed with respect at each other's strength. Aelin woke to the commotion next door and ran to the window above Wind's shop to see the fire burning in the slippery squid.
Wake up, Adam!
He shouted, shaking his brother. They rushed down the stairs and out of the shop to the tavern to see their father and Haram, the patrons desperately trying to put out the fire and wake the unconscious people. Aelin and Adam rushed over to Wynn and helped him to his feet.
We have to get these people out of here,
Wynn said, obviously pained and struggling to move. Wynn ignored his pain and picked up a patron in each arm. He carried them outside and moved back in for more. Aelin and Adam looked on as Haram charged at Aethor. Aethor used his weight and momentum against him by throwing himself forward and ducking into a ball at Haram's feet. He tripped on Aethor and crashed through the wall, falling from a ledge on the other side.
All heart!
He shouted as he crashed through a wooden wharf below. It splintered as he disappeared into the water beneath. Alim and Adam moved to their father's aid, but he raised a hand to stop them. Fire burned around him. He stood slowly, fists clenched and shirtless. Defined muscles glistened with sweat, looking like they were carved of stone. Red eyes from his blood rage technique burned like the fire around him. The image was burned into Aelin's mind. This was his father, Aethor Allheart, the warrior. As they turned to leave, Aelin spotted a single raven, black smoke trailing its movements as it perched on the roof of Wind's shop, watching them. They returned to Wind's shop and dressed their wounds.
The Church of the God-feared.
Wind scoffed.
What a joke. Nothing more than common street thugs.
Adam said with disdain as he helped to sew the cut on Aethor's arm.
What did they want with you, father?
Aelin said as he dabbed the wound on Aethor's head with a damp rag to clean it.
It was Aram's fault. My whole life I've been persecuted because Aram was named heretic to the Church of the God-feared. Having the name Allheart painted a target on my back. That's why I had to become strong, so I could fight to protect myself and the ones I love. One day, mark my words, I'll have my revenge against the Church of the God-feared.
Aethor got up.
When we have to be going. No doubt this will cause more problems for you if we stay. Will you be all right?
Wynn was lying down on his stomach, shirtless, with a bucket in one hand, unable to move. Large bruises covered him from where Haram had struck him.
I'll be fine, Aethor. Just hand me a drink from behind the counter. I'll just stay drunk until I wake tomorrow. That should dull the pain.
He tried to bellow out a laugh, only to stop and wince in pain. He coughed a few times, then waved goodbye.
Take the Carabook. Get out of here. But be careful on the road. There are much worse things creeping around in the darkness beyond these walls at night. Just release Dimitri when you're done with him. He'll sprint right back to me.
Aethor thanked Wynn for everything, and then moved out of the shop. They strapped Dimitri the Carabook to their boat cart and climbed in. They started to trot down the road. The tavern fire was just quenched by the local patrons. A carriage of sooty guardsmen in the robes of the Church of the God-feared came past them as they made their way along the city street. Ellen looked in the window and saw a man with a black, wide-brimmed hat and scars all over his face looking back at him. He stuck his head out the window of the carriage, lifted his hat so he could see better, and gave the three a good once-over as he passed by. He grinned wide and then sat back into his seat. They made their way to the North Road gate. A guardsman atop the parapet called down.
It's late! Nightmare creatures lurk in the dark beyond the wall. Head back!
Aethor whistled to get his attention, then flicked him a gold coin. The gates opened to let them out, and closed behind them. They lit some torches and continued up the North Road, which paralleled the river they came down on. Some ways up, they met a crossroads. A sign pointing left and right. On the left, the sign said, "Beware, the living forest lies ahead." On the right, it said, "Riverside," pointing directly at a stone bridge crossing the river away from the forest. They took the right to cross the bridge, but about midway over, they heard howls coming from the other side.
Barghasts. I saw them running past our house the other night. It seems they caught our scent. Yeah!
He yelled as he whipped the reins. Dimitri let out a squawk and started to run at speed over the bridge. They turned down the road, and a few minutes later their torches dimmed. Adam spotted a Barghast running to their right. Aelin spotted another to their left. They converged behind them, catching up with them.
Yeah!
Aethor yelled, pushing Dimitri to run faster. The Barghasts started to gain on them as they began to move downhill between a rocky gorge. Large dead vines crisscrossed overhead. The Barghasts jumped from one to another, quickly advancing overhead. As they started to make their way back uphill, they lost speed, and a Barghast pounced at them. Aethor stood up and with a straight kick knocked the beast away. It whimpered, roared, then got back up and continued chasing them. The other Barghast moved in front of them. Adam ripped off a thick branch from a passing dead tree, and as the Barghast tried to take a bite out of Dimitri, he threw the branch into its gnashing teeth. Dimitri fluttered its wings, jumped and kicked the beast to the ground as the cart rolled over it. The sound of cracking bones crunched under the cartwheel, sending the cart bouncing upwards. Aelin fell over the side. Adam grabbed his hand and helped to pull him up as the remaining Barghast ran up and snapped at Aelin's feet. Aelin grabbed onto the side of the cart, but couldn't lift himself up.
Aelin!
Adam shouted as the Barghast came in for more. He leaped from the cart onto the barghast's back. It crashed to shake him off, but he held onto it, then kicked off the barghast, launching himself forward, and the barghast to the right. It crashed into a fence and rolled down a hill, leaving deep claw marks as it fell. Adam rolled to a stop, dust kicking up around him. Aethor pulled the cart to a stop. The barghast got up and ran back the other way to devour the easier meal left behind in the chase. Aelin and Aethor pulled Adam back into the cart.
Are you all right, Adam?
Adam just nodded and sat down in the cart. With a flick of the reins, they sped down the road. Many hours later, they arrived at first light back at Riverside. Asta heard the carriage approaching and jumped out of bed. She covered her mouth in shock as she saw them.
What happened to you?
Aethor jumped down from the cart and embraced her.
We were attacked by soldiers in Dornshire and chased halfway home by nightmare creatures. I don't think we'll be returning to Dornshire again anytime soon,
Aethor explained. Asta helped the boys down from the carriage. She hugged them tightly, then led them inside for much-needed rest. Aethor gave Dimitri a big juicy carrot from the garden and removed the ropes tying him to the cart. Dimitri gave a happy squawk and sprinted off much faster than he was able to while dragging the cart and the three men, disappearing quickly down the road.
Be safe, my friend, and thank you.
Aethor called to him as Dimitri the carrot book rounded the bend.